What does it actually mean to be socially conscious today? It's a phrase we hear a lot, right? And it can spark some really complex, sometimes really passionate conversations.
Absolutely. And sometimes that conversation bumps up against this idea that maybe, just maybe, things can go too far. That idea of being too damn woke.
Exactly. And that's what we're digging into today. We're doing a deep dive into one particular source that, well, it really critiques this concept head on.
The goal here isn't to agree or disagree, but to really pull out the key arguments, the challenging perspectives from this source to help you, the listener, kind of navigate these discussions.
So the source is excerpts from a specific YouTube video. It's called "This Is Your Brain on Woke. Liberalism is a Mental Disorder" by someone called Aquarius Wave. Now, obviously, that title itself is provocative.
Very. It represents a certain kind of online commentary, quite critical of some aspects of social justice movements, often uses pretty strong language.
Right. So we're going to unpack the main arguments, the examples used in this specific video. Let's get started. So first off, to be really clear, the source, it doesn't seem to argue against social consciousness itself or, caring about the environment, wanting to fix problems. It sort of acknowledges those things are valuable.
Right. Where it draws the line, or what it frames as the problem, is when things reach an extreme. The source describes it as when everything is a cause, everything is a conspiracy, everything is seen as this massive system of injustice.
That's the core idea. And it gives some, really striking examples to make this point.
Yeah, like what?
Like mentioning a white cup being called an oppressive mug, or this idea that white keyboard keys are oppressive, but the black letters are, quote, doing the work and are in control.
Okay. So using everyday objects to illustrate what it sees as overreach.
Exactly. The source presents these as, and I quote, the sort of nonsense I hear on a daily basis. It's setting a really specific critical tone right from the start.
And it uses this analogy, doesn't it? When keeping it real goes wrong.
It does. How does that fit in?
Well, the source kind of extends that phrase. It talks about keeping it real stupid, keeping it real broke, keeping it real fire, even keeping it real in prison. And then it directly equates that with when going woke is too damn woke.
So it's suggesting there are actual negative consequences, like self-defeating outcome.
That seems to be the argument, that this too damn woke mindset, as the source defines it, can lead people down a path that's actually harmful to themselves. It's a pretty strong claim.
Okay. Now, the video shifts gears quite dramatically. It gets into these specific demands for restitution. This is where it really heats up. It features a speaker making these really direct claims. Things like, everything has been stolen from us, our gold, our jewelry, our cherished artifacts, our land, and the very essence of our culture.
Wow, that's comprehensive.
It is. And she calls for peaceful return initially, but then adds that if those pleas aren't heard, we will be prepared to meet force with force.
Okay, force with force. That's strong rhetoric. How does the main speaker in the source react to that?
They push back immediately, hard. They call it a lost battle, saying the people making these claims are outnumbered and outarmed.
So questioning the practicality, the real-world feasibility of that threat.
Exactly. It raises that question, what are the actual implications of saying something like that? And the source seems to double down on this idea of maybe a disconnect from reality.
How so?
Well, it challenges how universal these claims are. It asks the listener directly things like, how many of you have actually had your personal land taken from you, like land that you owned stolen from you, or your gold, your jewelry, specifically by a, quote, white person or non-black person?
So trying to ground the rhetoric in individual, verifiable experience.
Seems like it. And the speaker contrasts this with their own reported experience, saying when their stuff or their family's cars got stolen, quote, the perpetrators more times than not were somebody who looked exactly like us, black, as some would say.
Okay, that's a very pointed contrast being drawn there.
What about the bigger historical picture, like slavery? The source acknowledges slavery, calls it a dark stain upon human history, something every single civilization has participated in. That part's acknowledged. But then it challenges the direct link for people living today. It asks, how many people do you know who were slaves, worked on the plantations as slaves? How many of y'all out there are slaves currently?
Right. Drawing a line between historical fact and present-day lived experience.
Very sharp line. And then comes this really provocative offer from the source's speaker. They say they'll personally pay reparations, like a few dollars, a $20 bill, to anyone who can prove they're currently a slave.
Wow.
Yeah. Stating none of y'all were actually slaves. It frames the claims of "you stole my stuff" as a, quote, make-believe story about what you went through that you actually never went through.
So a very direct, almost confrontational dismissal of certain claims of present-day victimhood linked directly back like that.
Absolutely. Okay, moving on from the historical claims, the source also focuses heavily on what it sees as contradictions.
Right, the idea of inconsistency.
Yeah. And it starts with this interesting reversal on cultural appropriation. It points out that the militant speaker demanding restitution, they're wearing a Hamza necklace.
The hand symbol, often seen in Middle Eastern and North African cultures.
That's the one. And the source labels that as appropriation of, quote, brown people's culture.
Huh. So turning the appropriation argument back on the speaker, what's the broader point there?
The broader point seems to be about reliance on Western civilization, even while criticizing it.
Okay. How does that play out?
Well, the source points out the speaker is filming using technology, quote, created by the white supremacist, i.e. Western civilization.
Right. Phones, cameras, the internet.
Exactly. And being, quote, dressed in the garb of white supremacy, meaning Western clothes, using a car, an invention of the white supremacists.
So the argument is you can't really escape the system you're critiquing. Is that it?
Pretty much. The source asks this question: why is it that they continue to use the very same infrastructure of the quote-unquote white man, but then at the same time are trying to kind of distinguish themselves as completely separate from it?
It's highlighting a perceived tension between the rhetoric and the practical realities of living in the modern world.
And language, too. The source's speaker acknowledges they themselves are speaking English, the language of, quote, a person who doesn't look like my quote-unquote ancestors.
Right.
And argues that assimilation just happened. Quote, before we were completely unhinged and this racist, obsessed with skin color.
And does the source offer an alternative view or just critique?
Oh, it definitely offers a view. It explicitly states a preference for Western culture, saying the culture that is here, that is dominant Western civilization, has been the better culture.
Better in what sense?
Better outcomes, seemingly. It argues the free market capitalist system has been an improvement, that the democratic republic is probably the best form of government.
And the evidence for that, according to the source?
Migration. The fact that, quote, people come to America by the hundreds of millions or try to break into this country or have the desire to do so because it works.
Okay. So it's making a case for the success of Western systems based on their global appeal.
Yeah. And it then broadens the lens on colonization itself, arguing it wasn't just, quote, white men.
What other examples does it give?
It asks, why is it that we never talk about the Arabs, the Spaniard? It points out how Spanish and Arabic became dominant languages, how Islam spread through, quote, taking over the indigenous peoples.
So presenting colonization as a more widespread historical phenomenon, not unique to Europeans.
Exactly. He uses Morocco as an example, saying it shifted from Berber Amazi culture to people, quote, veiled in black, barely showing eyes, because colonizers forced them into these cultures.
Okay. So where does all this lead? What's the final challenge or point in this section?
It leads to this challenge. If you really believe Western ways are so bad, why not, quote, go back to the continent, find some remote, unconquered land, and live out your ancestral ways? Especially, it adds, since, quote, supposedly African, in the same way like Native Americans just have no concept of ownership.
It frames this as the too woke take.
Implying a kind of ultimate logical conclusion to the critique, if taken serious, a sort of put your money where your mouth is challenge.
That seems to be the framing, yeah. It's definitely provocative.
Quite a journey through this one source's perspective.
So we've gone from just finding too damn woke through its lens to looking at its critique of historical claims and now these perceived contradictions in modern life. What's the takeaway here?
Well, I think this source, regardless of whether you agree with its tone or conclusions, really pushes you to critically examine how we talk about history, how we connect it to identity, and how we navigate the actual systems we live in.
It challenges you to look past the rhetoric, maybe, to the practicalities.
Yeah, and the historical nuances, things like cultural exchange versus imposition, how societies actually develop and change. It forces some uncomfortable questions. Ultimately, what this deep dive shows is how one particular voice is trying to, cut through what it sees as noise. It's pushing for a more, let's say, grounded perspective on being woke.
And for you listening, hopefully exploring this source prompts a deeper thought process about that relationship between these big historical claims, your own personal experience, and the culture you navigate every single day.
It's definitely a reminder that really getting to grips with a topic means engaging with views that might be challenging, maybe even unsettling.
Absolutely. It's rarely black.
So Here's something to chew on. How do we balance that genuine desire for historical justice, for acknowledging past wrongs, with the messy realities of today, our interconnectedness, individual agency, especially when, as the source points out, so many parts of our lives are tied up with the very cultures or systems we might critique?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Finding that balance.